We had a chance to catch up with Rod White. He's an Olympic archer and loves hunting this time of November. He shares how he has found the most success during this later part of the rut. Here we go. Rod, how's it going, man?
Hey, man, how's it going?
Good. Excited for this. We were just talking here a little bit. I know from a little bit of due diligence for this is one of your favorite times of year. We're talking about November 14th is when this goes live. And we're going to talk about some very specific details of making the most of this time of year if you're still sitting on a tag or still chasing a Pacific buck. But before we get into this, take a chance to introduce yourself of who you are.
So my name is Rod White. A lot of you probably know me from the Deer Society. Some of you, if you're older, you'll remember me maybe from the Olympic Games in '96. I won a gold there and a bronze in 2000. And pretty much made my living hunting for the most part and in real estate farm management for a while. Did a lot of, I used to have a company with a partner called Advanced Whitetail Systems, which is where we started doing some things with Deer Society. And my ex-father-in-law and Mrs. Dopey's buck lore. So I've got a little bit of a background with deer anyways.
Yeah. That's really cool. And you're the first Olympic medalist to ever be on the podcast. So congratulations. I know you can put that on your resume.
My first free pair of Nikes.
Yeah, that's hilarious, man. Well, no, that's really cool. And it's very clear you're ate up by whitetails. And I think that's always something to, because there's guys right now that maybe think about whitetails maybe 3 months out of the year, but you're a dude that probably thinks about whitetails 365, 24/7. So some things that we can learn from you for sure.
Appreciate that.
There's
a lot of elk mixed in there, but
yeah. Okay. All right. Take out 30 days for September. No, man. Well, that's really cool. And so, this is airing November 14th. And what do you think about this time of year? I know we talked to a lot of different guys, and some people absolutely despise November for the randomness and all these different things. It's like you're in it or you're not. And then there's some guys that have success of killing mature bucks during this time period too. So where does November 14th, just say the end of the month, rank in your favorite times to chase whitetails?
it's number one by far. From about the 14th, really at like the 11th through the 13th are the ones those are the days I don't even, almost don't bother. I still go out, but I don't think I've ever connected with a buck in those days. Not to say obviously you couldn't, but from that's
what do you think that's just peak lockdown?
Yeah, and by lockdown, like I hate that name because it's a little bit of a misnomer. You've just got your mature bucks. Most of your does are in heat, and the bucks that are going to be mating with the does are doing that right then, and they're just not moving far, generally speaking, unless they get bumped. In my opinion, in my experience. But what I do watch a lot at that time of the year is when you do see a buck with a doe, they're moving so slow, and there's been times where man, I'll watch maybe cover 100 yards, and I sit there all day long looking at those things. And you just, some cases, depending on the terrain and stuff, you may not be able to do anything about it. So that's the roughest period for me. But as soon as that breaks loose, and it's usually around the 14th, from then until Thanksgiving Day, if you don't have gun pressure in your state, those are, in my opinion, the best day to shoot a giant whitetail, especially if you're a public land hunter or you're a person that maybe have limited access to land, to where like you can't target a buck. Like I know a lot of people watch juries and those guys that own large tracts, and I used to manage 3,000 plus acre tracts. So it is a very frustrating time of the year for those people, but for those of us that don't have a target buck nailed, it's a great time because those bucks are I liken it to this. It's like it's closing time at the bar, and so most of those bucks have gotten there were lots of ladies, and now there's only like a couple ladies, and so those guys that are all lined up at the bar right there, they're going to start moving from bar to bar trying to find some others if they haven't that last hour or so, and that's kind of what you got going on in those 6 to 7 days, in my opinion. Is you've got, or maybe it's a little bit more than that, you've got time to capitalize on those deer that are moving large distances, but it's also a time where you really have to be a good woodsman and understand terrain. You have to understand funnels. You have to understand what bedding and transition areas look like, because they're going to be going basically from bedding area to bedding area, looking for does. So every place that they've known in their heads that there were does before, like a local bar, they're going to those local bars, trying to pick up on one. So
now when you help manage some of those large tracks, was this the time period when you get the random text like, oh, that deer we've been chasing all year, he just got shot, 2 miles away. And then you're just like,
yes.
Dang it. So I think just to illustrate that for people, sometimes you can be on the good end of luck or the bad end of luck, and maybe this time of period is when you could be on the really good end of luck. Or
Yeah,
it's hard to say.
yeah, and you're going to put a lot of time in. And that's what my little saying, I guess, I tell everybody is tenacity kills. And so it's the toughest time of the year because you're going to see less deer, like a lot less deer, but your mature bucks are going to be up and on their feet. So you're really, if you're targeting an ultra mature buck, and when I say mature, in my opinion, a mature buck is 5.5 and older. 4.5 maybe some people consider. It depends on where you live.
Sure.
I'm in Michigan right now, doing
So
some
three
work.
and a half.
Yeah, 3.5-year-old deers. It's not mature, but it's as good as it's probably going to get for you. I know there's bigger buckshot, but
Sure.
I'm me just driving around here while I'm working, looking at fields. There's 2.5-year-olds, maybe a 3.5. You just don't see much better than that. And the guys that are shooting stuff around here aren't doing any better than that. So and they've got a gun season that comes in on November 14th or 15th.
Yeah.
So you throw in a gun season on top of that, and yeah, it's a little different. You just gotta if you're in a state like Iowa, Kansas, Illinois, Ohio, maybe some of those states where you've got mature bucks, a lot of this does apply to that.
Okay. And so let's say for someone that is listening to this right now on November 14th and they were chasing a Pacific deer and he kind of disappeared, let's say the 10th or the 9th or something like that. What is a mental strategy for this? And I know it's so case dependent of, how much history do you have? What's the behavior of this deer? But is there any sort of golden rule or anything to consider to try to get back on that darn deer during this period?
I'll be honest with you. This time period is a really difficult time. Now the very end of it, they may be coming back home a lot more, especially if you're the one with the food. And again, I'm talking a private landowner in this
Hmm.
scenario. If you're a public land hunter, you get towards the very tail end of that. It's almost game time for you. Your window to kill, a specific deer really is that last week of October into that first
Yep.
week of November,
Yep.
in my opinion.
Yep.
But like I said, on the other side, if you know how to read a map, you know how to read contours, you know how to look at bedding area, you know how deer run river corridors in specific areas, and every area is a little different. How I hunt Kansas is different than how I hunt Iowa. It's vastly different than how I would hunt Michigan.
Hmm.
So it just depends on where you're at. But you've got to be able to understand what those funnels are and where a lot of those bucks, when they're breeding, they're going to push those does. Like a couple days going into this, you're going to see them in the goofiest spots, like
Hmm.
out in the middle of wide open fields without a tree in sight, or you'll see them in some weird fence row or cattle pasture they wouldn't normally be in. And
Hmm.
so you've got to think outside the box for that. And for me, I rely a lot on my antlers that time of year, a lot on my antlers. I do a lot of spot and stock, and my grunt calls too, especially if I'm hunting bedding areas, long breeding grunts. Those are things I work on.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's just say, for example, someone's listening to this and they're driving around while they're listening to it, and they see a big deer locked up in a field on a fence row, and you're like, "Oh my gosh!" And they call the farmer, they get access, or maybe it's one that they have permission on. Walk through the do's and don'ts of this, because let's say he's got a doe pinned down and it's in more of an open area. Maybe there's slightly rolling hills. I mean, what do you do? Do you try to close the distance to 150 yards and rattle, or what's the strategy?
Yeah, exactly. Well, I'd like to get under 100. If I
Okay.
can get under 100, now I can't always do that, but let's take a scenario of there's an open fence row and you see them bedded down with a doe. If you can be on the other side of the fence row, that's really ideal. And then I just do my best to sneak down there. It might take me hours to get down there, but they're not going to go anywhere. In my opinion, I don't think they're going to go. I mean, in my experience, I should say, they rarely get up and leave. They're going to keep that doe there, or that doe's going to keep them there, however you want to say it. And so if I can get under 100 yards, I'll grunt first, just a couple contact grunts, I call them, just burp, burp, and just
Mhm.
see what their reaction is, if there's a reaction. If it's super windy and rainy and they can't hear, I'm gonna grab some antlers and I'm gonna smack them antlers together a little bit, but not like super aggressive. Just tick him a little bit, like loud enough that he can hear and get his attention. And as soon as you get that deer's attention, stop, just completely stop, and don't do it again. Like no matter how painful that is to watch that process, he will come over. It's really guys that elk hunt. It's the same kind of thing. They're going to come over and check out and see what's going on,
Mhm.
because you're an intruder in his area, and especially they push that thing all the way out there in the middle of nowhere. They're not gonna they're not gonna just take off and run across somewhere else. They feel secure out there that they've got their doe they're breeding and no one's gonna mess with them. And so it's usually a shock to them that there's another deer there. And generally speaking, they usually come in fast and furious.
Okay. I
So,
was just gonna
if
ask.
you're laying down, for example, like I've done that before, like where it's flat. Illinois and Iowa, we got a lot of flat terrain, and like you've got to be prepared to sit up and draw your bow all in one motion because you get one chance at motion. They'll
Mhm.
stop and look at you, give you the deer in the headlight look, for lack of a better term, and you got to be able to stick one in them right then and there.
You got about 4 or 5 seconds, I assume, before they
Yep.
gone.
Yeah. Now the other thing is too, and I, there's a couple guys that do this extremely well. Chancey Walters,
Yeah.
in Southwest Iowa, like he's a master at doing this, and I've done it quite a bit, not to the degree of success that he's had all the time, but taking a decoy with you, and by decoy, they make their own homemade ones. I have used one, and I think it's not heads up. It's a silhouette basically that you put on your bow,
Yep.
and I have used that in certain situations and killed deer with that. That's an excellent decoy. I have not used the one that goes to the front of your bow. That's a big, it's oversized.
Mhm.
I haven't used that one yet, but I should probably give it a shot.
Yeah.
We're very successful with those.
And I think just to reiterate or to make it clear, you mentioned it might take you hours to get within 100 yards. So, I mean,
Yes.
that takes some serious, serious patience where I think most guys would probably get a little antsy and try to push a little bit too hard. So, I mean, it is a slow crawl, quite literally.
Yeah, and I use all kinds of camo, so I know I'm wearing a Sitka coat. It's whatever, but I will tell you, like you've got to have good gear, like really good gear to do this kind of stuff if you wind up in one of those situations, because you're talking that time of the year in Iowa, man, it can be 20 degrees, with a 17-mile-an-hour wind, and that's cold,
Hmm.
and so that's quite the process, crawling all the way out. This is pretty much what you're doing. Is You're crawling the whole way out there. And again, it depends on the scenario. Like this could happen in the timber too, in a big open timber, which is awesome because that's a lot easier to get up on.
Sure.
If there's some wind noise, like to cover you, or you can use a creek bed to get as close as you can. I've done that before, where a couple hundred yards, you can see through the timber in some of these places, and yeah, I've killed bucks, climbed down out of my stand, and that's one of the biggest things I can tell you is if you see a deer that you haven't seen before that you want to kill, go down and go after him because you're not going to see him again. Like it's so rare to see that same deer twice.
Yeah.
You might see him the next day in the same area, but probably not. He's going to move on
So
to the next.
it's the fourth quarter, do or die, make a play,
Do
take
or
the
die.
shot. Yeah.
Yep. And
Yeah.
I'll tell you honestly, I would say it may not sound like a high percentage chance, but I would say 20 to 30% of the time I kill those deer that I climb
Wow.
down the stand. So that's 1 out of 4, 1 out of 5.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
Stack that up for 5 years. That's $2 that you probably wouldn't have shot otherwise.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But don't like it's like we said, I get within, if I can get just under 100 yards, it seems to be the magic number, and then I can rattle, I grunt, I call them over.
Mhm.
If you're in that buffer zone, it seems like that's you're in the chips.
Now, I know this is probably an obvious question, but what are you doing to try to get the wind advantage in that scenario too? Are you
Well,
just
I
having
mean, yeah, obviously, I don't. I used to be when when I used to have access to deer in a pen, I'd have all my stuff kept there all year long, and I could get away with absolute murder.
yeah.
I really don't do anything scent wise anymore. I just try to play that wind as much as possible.
Mhm.
I will tell you, in my experience, if it's possible, the percentages go way up if there's a little bit of a crosswind, rather than like a wind blowing from that deer to me,
Mhm.
because they do want to try to get down around downwind of you somehow. A lot of the time, sometimes they just come right at you. But they're going to move quick, and once that whole process starts, you're not going to have time to like reposition or move, and most likely you're going to be caught anyways if you move
Yeah.
outside of drawing your bow.
Yeah, I grew up on a small deer farm as well, and I did the same thing as a kid. I would hang my hunting clothes in the in the pen,
It's
let them
total
rub up
cheating.
against it. Yeah. It's definitely a unique opportunity to do that. I thought about a business where it was like a dry cleaning service where you'd bring in your hunting gear and just have like a line, and you can
Right.
have your ticket and come and go. I never executed against that, but I thought that'd be a pretty fun idea. So yeah, that's definitely a really exciting strategy, like right in your face, and that's got to be an absolute thrill. And then the inverse of this is you mentioned you're going to be seeing a lot less deer. So people are just coming off this high of a lot of activity, a lot of 3 and 4 year olds running around, depending on what part of the country you're in. And now the mental battle of what you mentioned, tenacity of, man, I'm seeing half the amount of deer or a quarter of the amount of deer I was seeing a week ago. How do you balance, how often are you bouncing around? Because it sounds like if you're not seeing deer, you're relocating. So what does that strategy look like?
Well, for the most part, like I've been looking at places, throughout. I hunt a lot of public land anymore, probably 95% of it. And so, like, this time of year, again, I'm up here working in Michigan, but normally I set out cameras. I try to get them out before I go out elk hunting, and then I pull those all about around the second week of October. And the thing I'm looking for on each parcel of public land is uh, what age class of deer am I looking at? Like, am I seeing a lot of 3-year-olds on camera? Am I seeing a couple 4 or 5-year-olds? Am I seeing a lot of 4-year-olds? That those places when I start, I inventory them because they change every year. Here in Iowa, a lot of people that are local look down on public land, which is great because they're not there every year. But there's a lot. The most of the pressure that I see on public land here in Iowa is about from October 25th and really getting into that first week of November until about
Oh
the
yeah.
14th, and then it's gone,
Yep.
completely gone. So, you don't know what's been killed off of those, obviously, but when I pull my cameras, I know what I've got in certain parcels. Those are the parcels I'm going to focus on, and some of those are really wide open places, where you don't have a ton of hunting pressure, anyways. And those places that I know that I've got good pictures of, those are, I focus on going to those, and I'll kind of bounce around from each one of those to each one of those, depending on what I had on camera, what I've already seen while I was hunting, and that really dictates where I'm going to go for the most part, and terrain. You won't catch me on a lot of flat parcels that time of year. I'm going to be in a lot of places. I'll either be glassing cornfields, and I got my Onyx with me, trying to get a hold of landowners to see if I can access that deer.
Mhm.
If it's on flat ground, because I will drive sometimes midday. I like to hunt as much as possible. If it's daylight, I like to either be in a tree or I want to be on a stalk, one of the two.
Mhm.
But bad weather and things like that, it seems like that's also time whenever I see a lot of those deers out there. Of course, that's when you're driving around. So
So
I'm
you've seen a lot of deer. When you say bad weather, meaning hot, or bad weather as in a lot of wind and snow?
wind and rain,
Yeah.
snow. That those seem to be the days where you see them. But again, it's percentage wise. You're most of us are probably not in a tree. We're in our trucks driving around. So of course you see more then than
Sure.
when
Yeah.
with great weather. But I do think that nasty weather. Once there's rain on the ground, in my opinion, like they can smell so much better. If you watch a deer come into antlers, like if you rattle one in or you grunt one in, you'll see them licking their nose rapidly, and they're trying to get moisture on their nose, kind of like a bird dog, so that they can pick up scent easier. And that's really kind of, when you have those kind of conditions, they can smell really well. They're traveling long distances, and they can pick up the scent of other deer quickly that may be in estrus. And
Mhm.
I just think it makes them more efficient than
Yeah.
what it is when it's dry outside.
Yeah, I think of a lot of years, especially during this time frame when there is rain or a mist or something like that. Those seem to be some excellent days. And those are just a lot of the days. I shot a buck. I don't know how I hit him, and it's raining. Like, how many times have we all heard that story? And I always think of, well, maybe those are some excellent days to stick a buck. Maybe
Yeah.
not a fun day to track one, but but it seems like there's a lot of deer that get shot in those conditions. Now that you mention it.
Yeah. Well, and especially like the stuff we were just talking about a little bit earlier in that open ground where you're stalking stuff. The windier and nastier it is, the better. I mean,
Hmm.
those are days I will spend. I'm not gonna go sit in a tree if there's 25-mile-an-hour winds and it's pouring down rain. I'm just too old for that anymore. I used to. Then I figured out it's a lot comfier in the truck. But I'll drive and I'll spot, and I'll go to those places. Like I said, I've been looking at those places all year long where I know I've got more mature deer, and then the ones that are glassable like that. Which for me in Iowa, for example, a lot of that's kind of west of Des Moines. You get a lot more of that than what you have, or in a couple of the southern counties in South Central. But there's other areas of the country too where you can be in for sure. I mean, I've done it in Illinois too,
Hmm.
where you just have more conducive areas to that, and find those bucks.
Are you spending a lot of time in a hardwood setting during this time period, or do you like
Um,
the open areas because you can just see more and try to make a play on something?
yeah, I like them. I, if I had my preference, if I I've been fortunate to kill a lot of really good deer.
Mhm.
So I'll preface it with that. But I would rather kill, a 160-inch deer, a 5-year-old 160-inch deer, than I would out in the open on a stalk like that. Where we just scenarios kind of we just talked, than what I would in a tree stand and having a 180-inch deer walk by that's 5 or 6 years old. It's such a rush, and it's also a lot of hard work, which is what makes it more rewarding, I
Sure.
think, too.
Yeah. Yeah. And I just imagine that type of hunt is just an absolute rush too, to be basically eye to eye with a deer like that too. It's really cool. I mean, but how do you handle the slow days during this period? Because there's going to be some slow days for most people. So I mean, if someone's, let's say they are hunting in a timber setting, they can't see super far, or maybe they're in a state where you just simply cannot see more than 200 yards. How do you handle a slow time. You get in your stand, you feel good about it in the morning, and now it's 9, 10 o'clock, and you haven't seen much. Maybe a doe family cruise through or a dink buck cruise by. I mean, are you packing up and moving somewhere else, or are you sticking it out there because you feel confident about it?
Yeah, so if I'm stand hunting that day, for example, I hunt all day long most of the time. Again, unless it's like crazy bad weather. So generally speaking, in each one of those areas that I might be hunting in, I have usually 3 or 4 different areas that I like to hunt, and it changes. In the evenings, I still want to be closer to a field edge somewhere. In the mornings, I'd rather be in some thicker bedding area, and midday I'll move to transition. So even though I'm hunting all day long, I'm generally getting out once or twice and moving
Mhm.
to another tree. It might only be a couple hundred yards away or 100 yards away, but I have a really good idea of what's around me. Especially in those open areas, to know where I can move to and when I can move.
Mhm.
And that's why I do a lot of saddle hunting, and I do a lot of lately a lot. I mean, last year really, Andre gave me a Lone Wolf gave me a or set me up with a point five,
Mhm.
and that was like the perfect balance because that one, if I got stuck in the tree all day long, I could turn around and sit down on the seat.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Yeah.
didn't weigh it, just a skosh more than the little platform, but being able to be, with a saddle, the biggest advantage that I can see is I can get in almost any daggum tree that's relatively straight. I mean, it
Yep.
can be fairly crooked, and I can be comfortable enough for a couple hours that I can make it work.
Mhm.
So that's one thing that I think has really changed for me in the past few years is having the ability to just pop a stand in. I just want to hunt a specific area. So I get to that area. The thing I've learned over the years is when I started out hunting in the Midwest, I thought, well, I need to be where all these trails intersect. And 99% of the bucks I shoot are not walking on a trail anyways. In fact,
Mhm.
most of the time I'm calling them in. So for me, I just want to be in a specific area. So if I know I want to be in the 75-yard area, it doesn't really matter what the wind's doing. There's probably going to be a tree there somewhere I can get in if
Mhm.
I'm in a hardwood setting.
Sure.
Um, so
So yeah, you're bouncing around a decent amount then, depending on what you're seeing.
yeah. And the other thing it helps me not do is get on my phone. And I think that's the number one thing that saves lives of deer is phones. Like, I mean, from camera guys that have been with me to guys that I've, guided, guys that I've, land manager or landowners that I've helped kill specific deer, dude, they are always on their phone. They get bored and they start scrolling through Facebook or, Twitter or whatever. And man, that's you're missing, huge opportunities. And, it's hard to do myself, but that's, like I said, that breaks up the day for me enough that, I can kind of stay away from that. It's hard to, but and I film a lot of my stuff. Like, it's funny because people ask me what kind of camera I'm using. It's an iPhone. Like, it's just my phone. So I do use my phone a lot, but it's
Yeah.
usually to record what's going on because I do love helping people. Like, I get a ton of emails and messages from people that, oh my gosh, what I heard in your podcast was spot on and that really helped. I know it's, there's not the same thing happening all across the country all the time, but I try to give out as much. Here's what's happening real time for me right
Yeah.
now, and that's I'll give updates from my phone, but outside of that, it's kind of a post and ghost thing, man. I post it and then I'll
Throw
look
it in
at
your
it.
pocket. Throw it in your
Yep,
pocket.
yeah, go back to hunting.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and it's to your point. If you're stacked up in there and there's nothing going on, boredom. You pull out your phone and what's going on in the world, and and sometimes it's better to stack up in a spot with no service because that temptation is gone then. But no, that's so. Yeah, so keep that darn thing in your pocket. That's what your ethos is then.
Yeah, and if I have it out, if I'm not posting something like that, I'm looking at maps and I'm coming up with my next play for the next day. I'm looking at the weather and I'm looking at my maps.
Mhm.
But it's again a very short time period. I know that sounds like super elementary, but man, most people just they're so addicted to their phone, they just can't set it down, and that's there's so many little things that you might miss. In the Midwest here, if you see a buck, and I get it, maybe not so much in Michigan where there's some lower age class deer or whatever, but or a lot of hunting pressure. But in Iowa, if I see a buck 200 yards away, and if I wasn't looking down on my phone, I see a buck cross there I want to kill, and I hit the antlers together. That time of year is about a 70-80% chance he's going to come straight over to me, and
Mhm.
I would have missed that opportunity if I was looking at my phone. So
Mhm. And you mentioned, I just want to really break down the rattling sequence or what your strategy is there. So when it was locked down, you mentioned rattle until you see him get the attention of the buck, stop immediately. Is that same strategy applicable when you're in the tree stand? Just you're watching him, and then if he does one of these, put him away, get ready.
yeah, I don't. There's lots of times I've been rattled like they're looking in my direction, but I
Hmm.
wait till they get throw their heads behind a tree,
Sure.
and I'll click them a little bit or whatever. As soon as I see their ears spin my direction, and they make any kind of advance to me, like even a step or two, you've got to stop because they're going to pinpoint you like quickly.
Hmm.
Weather's a factor too, or road noise if you're hunting near a road. If there's other noise going on, you might have to be really loud with them and really bang those things pretty
Hmm.
loud. So for me, like if I'm in a tree, regardless of what time of year it is, if I'm going to rattle, I'm usually starting off clicking them together a little bit. If you watch deer fight, they're not like two rams banging their heads together, so you don't hit those things. I'm just clicking and popping them, twisting them. And then I'll get more aggressive, kind of as that sequence goes on a little bit. If I don't see anything come in right away, I'll do a little bit and I'll kind of look around everywhere. And then if I don't see nothing, I'll get a little more aggressive. And the only reason it's mostly because I want that sound to travel as far as it can, obviously. And I think that's the advantage to using antlers is you, you can hear them way farther off than what you can a grunt call, obviously. And
Sure.
so I think all it is once they recognize, they hear that sound and, oh, there's a fight going on, they're generally going to come on over for the most part I've seen, and then come long distances like that. So, but I don't, there's no special magic way I click them or pop them, or I'm just twisting them, making some noise.
Okay, got it. Would you try rattling in Michigan? Let's say you're hunting in Michigan this year, and it's the same time period. Are you going to try it? Because there's someone listening right now, like, oh yeah, that works in Iowa or these quote unquote low pressure states. Would you try something like this in a Pennsylvania or Michigan?
Yeah, well, like, again, most of those states, it seems like they got their gun seasons going off, and once the guns
Sure, it
go,
changes everything.
yeah, it's over. But no, I would try it here. I mean, and I know people say, well, it doesn't work for me. Well, dude, I'm not in the tree with you. I didn't see what you did. How did you approach your stand? Like, there's so many factors that come into
Sure.
that.
Yep.
Did you bounce a bunch of deer on your way in there? Do they already know you're there?
Yep.
Or who knows?
Yeah.
But grunts seem to be effective dang near everywhere I've been. If you've heard a deer grunt where you live at, there's no reason they shouldn't come to the grunt where you
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
are.
Yeah.
But I
Very
will
true.
say too, like here, I'm in South Haven right now, and there's an Allegan National Forest up here. We went and checked out a spot there yesterday, and it's pretty flat. So I would think calling could be pretty effective if there's some older age class deer in there, but they've probably been called at a bunch by all the other people.
Hmm.
So honestly, like something like this, I probably won't do much blind calling at all. Meaning, like I don't see a deer, I'm not trying to interact with a deer. I would probably rarely do that. Maybe if I'm super bored, just try it here and there. But
Yeah.
it's yeah, it is what it is. In other states, you can rattle in. Kansas is unbelievable. The amount of deer I can rattle in Kansas.
Yeah, that would be a lot of fun. And how often are you blind rattling in let's say a big buck state? I mean, is that every sit, every? I mean, especially
Yeah,
during this time period.
yeah, about once an hour or so. I mean, that's just a rough guess. I don't time it or nothing like that. But
Hmm.
I just figure, deer that are in the area, I'm just trying to reach out to the deer that can hear me. And I generally won't do it right away in the morning. I'll usually start around like 8 or 9 o'clock, after it's been light for an hour or so.
Hmm.
And then I'll start a couple rattling sequences. So, like I said, about once an hour or something like that, kind of when I get bored.
Yeah,
But
yeah. So,
yeah,
and then what do you think about midday movement during this time period as well?
that's when I kill probably 90% of the animals I kill.
And
And it
midday to
doesn't.
you is like 10 to 2.
Yeah, up to maybe 2:33.
Okay.
That around that 2 to 3 hour mark, somewhere in there, I'm gonna get down and move to another spot. If I've been sitting in the same stand all day,
Hmm.
I don't generally like to get out until around 2. But those days when I'm moving 2 or 3 times, just maybe it's just incredible boredom I'm having, or it's really bad weather. I'm trying to warm up a little bit. Just moving a little bit will warm you up enough that it keeps you sharp. Kind of thing.
Hmm.
So,
Got it.
but yeah, usually by it seems like that hour from 2:30 ish to around 4 is generally dead for me. I don't think I've ever killed a deer in that. I'm not saying you can't, obviously, just
Sure.
the dead time of the day.
So you said 2 to 3:30 ish is usually pretty slow.
Yeah, and so here's the other thing that's going on when you're hunting a lot of public land, like I do too. You've got people that are leaving around 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, and you've got people that are doing their scouting midday,
Hmm.
and then you've got people that are going back in their stands around four
Two.
o'clock.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, well, they're walking in their stuff. They're probably bumping deer. Highly likely. Even if they don't see them bumping deer, they're probably their wind's blowing all over the place. So, those are times when deer are getting up and moving again.
Yeah.
So that's why I like that time of day quite a bit, especially if I'm hunting public ground. There's been days where if I'm not feeling the best or whatever, I might skip out in the first couple hours and I'll go
Hmm.
out and I'll sit the rest of the day somewhere. But highly pressured stuff, especially middle of the day, is phenomenal.
Hmm. And do you see this a lot of that is just rut activity of them cruising, bucks looking for the next doe, or do you think it is some of the bumping going on, or
I think
both?
it's some of the bumping. Yeah, I think they get bumped, and I think some of it is cruising too. The more mature bucks, if it's, I mean, I think they're on their feet as much as possible. But that's
Hmm.
the time of the year it seems like to me where you see a lot of deer that are bucks by themselves that are cruising. I don't know how many of you guys have seen this, but I've seen it multiple times. Seems like at least once or twice a year, see where a deer just is cashed out, like he's walking, all of a sudden I'm bedding down right here,
Yeah.
and then he takes a little nap for a couple minutes, head goes down a couple times, pops back up, and then takes off and runs again. So
Yeah.
I don't think there's a whole lot of downtime, honestly, with them. I just think there's a lot less deer movement. Those does are not going anywhere after what they've been through for the past 3 or 4 days, and so they're not moving much at all. But that makes those bucks get up and move quite a bit more.
Yeah. Well, this is a thought I've always had. Those mature does are pretty tough to trick. I mean, they're pretty inquisitive once they feel something's a little off. And I think sometimes what gets a lot of bucks killed is when those does are locked down and they're not moving around because they're sick of getting harassed, and you have these mature bucks kind of cruising around. And do you think that's a crazy theory, or do you think there's some validity to that?
No, I think they're checking those does when those does are bedded down like that. They're going to check them if they're not in estrus or they're not ready to be bred. They're going to the next one. They're not going to dink with them at all
Hmm.
because they've already been through some breeding. They're looking for that again, and they don't want anything to do with any of the other stuff. A lot of those big deer I've killed, man, a lot of them are they're loners by themselves. Like I
Yep.
don't eat throughout the entire season. Like some of the biggest deer and more mature deer that I've killed have been deer that like they'll either walk into a field and they clear the field, everything leaves, or they'll stay clear on the other end of it and are like super shy compared to the other deer. And
Hmm.
so I don't think in general they like being around other deer. Anyways, they just had a taste of that rut love, and that's what they want, and they're going to find it, or otherwise they're going to move on to the next one until they get tired of walking miles and miles and miles and not finding any, and then
Hmm.
they're going to start slowing down. That's usually around that Thanksgiving time period, a little bit after that.
Hmm. Now, obviously, the morning it sounds like you're within a bedding area of some sort, and then as you're transitioning to midday, is that just what you would see on the map of, man, this looks like a pretty good constriction of movement for deer?
Yeah, it's either that or it's a place that I've walked through. So like this time of the year, like I said, normal, and this is backing up here a few weeks when you're listening to this. So time period towards the end of October and first few weeks of November, I'm spending more time with boots on the ground than what I am in a tree, and especially during the midday hours. And so when I find spots that I like a lot that look like heavy bedding areas, I'm marking them on my. I got like if you looked at my Onyx, you'd like your mind would explode. Like it wouldn't be able to. What is this mess?
Uh-huh.
Because all those marks are places where hey, I want to come back here. I'm
Hmm.
going to come back here if I need to, and I just drop a mark and I put, hey, this is great for a northwest wind or north wind or whatever, north through an east wind, and then I've got those in there, and then I organize all those. It sounds like a little bit of a pain in the rear end, but honestly, it makes a big difference. I'll organize those so that when I have a day when I've got northwest winds, I've got these spots available. And so I'll just look at that map and go, okay, here's all my spots that are good for this wind set, and then those are the ones I go and focus on. If that makes sense.
No, that makes a lot of sense, and I think that hits a good point of the importance of in-season scouting and trying to figure out, because I mean everyone's been in this position where they find something. I mean, even the bucks that start showing up, let's say around this last week of October, it seems like a lot of times those are the deer you're probably going to be truly hunting during this 14th whatever period of November. At least that's my opinion on it.
Well, and the other thing you're doing while you're doing that too is you're also scouting hunter activity. That's huge. Knowing where those other stands are. Every one of mine, all mine, like I have a bunch of antelope marks here in the Midwest. People are like, what is this? Those are called them goat head tree stand spots. It's the inside joke, but yeah, all those spots, I know where I've got a lot of traffic at. But what's interesting in Iowa, for example, you can only draw every 5 or 6 years, maybe
Mhm.
more as time goes on here. But because of that, most of the residents don't jack with the public land, and so the non-residents that are hunting in 2022 are not going to be back again until 2026 or 2028.
Mhm.
So you've got different people that are hunting all the time coming into those public lands. So that's changing up quite a bit too.
Mhm.
And most of that pressure is gone a little bit later. So sometimes, like I have a track. There's a track in Jefferson County I love to hunt, and you posted a picture. I knew better, but I posted a thing up. I had my cameras. I was explaining on here's how I would approach a piece of public land, which is a piece I did hunt, and
Mhm.
I had two really good deer I'd seen on there. And within that next week, there were 9 trucks there, and I think 8 of them were from out of state.
Oh
So
yeah.
I blew up my own spot. That was dumb. But come back there a week later, everybody was gone because
Yeah.
they all went home.
Yep.
So, things are rapidly changing all the time. That's why it's so important. The in season scouting to me is things are changing and adapting all the time. Spots that you'd completely disregarded for whatever reason because of pressure in there, maybe completely wide open, nobody's even there because other people get tired running into people too.
Yeah.
Constantly changing.
Yeah. All right. So let's do this scenario. Someone bucked out. They're headed to a new state. It's November 14th. They hopped in their truck and they're going to over the counter state and they want to try to kill a deer. Are you just covering a bunch of ground and just walking until you get the hair on the back of your neck standing up like, ooh, this is the spot I need to drop a pin?
Well, I'm starting with Onyx, and it's just what I used. I'm not sponsored by them, so I don't care what anybody uses. It just I started with it, and so now for me to transfer my stuff to some other app would shoot me in the head. I don't have time for that. But I'm constantly looking at like if I'm going to go to a new piece I haven't been to, like my Kansas tag this year. I don't know if I'm even going to get to go, but if I get to go out there, I've never been there before. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to look at my maps, see what access there is, like what public land is in that area. I'm going to kind of funnel down on the terrain features if there are in that specific area. I'm gonna go ahead and pick my spots based on my basic knowledge. So I'm looking for ag fields. Onyx has even a crop layer. It doesn't seem to be perfect, but it's pretty much on point for the most part. If it says there's corn there, there's usually corn there, kind of thing.
Mhm.
So I'll look at that, pick my spots that I like before I ever get there, and then I'll go walk 'em. Like yesterday, we had a point. Actually, a guy told me about it, and that's another thing. So after I do that, I do get on forums. I spend a bunch of time on forums looking around, nosing around. I ask for help
Mhm.
because I hunt different places all the time. Like I rarely hunt the same places over and over and over again, except for maybe in Iowa, just closer to home. And I'm willing to help other people out because I found that if I help people out, that comes back like tenfold to me,
Yeah.
which a lot of people would disagree with. They want to keep everything a secret. Well, I mean, man, if you're only hunting a state once every 5 or 6 years, what do you care? I mean,
Yeah.
so and I hunt out west, obviously a lot. So
Mhm.
I'm kind of that mindset that I'll help other people out to a degree. But I also get, gosh, I had like 10 messages yesterday of people with pictures of their bucks and maps and what do I do? And oh my gosh, I need some help. I help people what I can, but I'm not gonna sit on my phone all day and night.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
But
Well,
that's it. It's huge getting information from other people. So
mhm.
so I work my e-scouting, if you want to call that first, and then I'll jump online and see what I can find. I'll look up, county records if I can, like the Pope and Young stuff, which
Mhm.
is usually out of date and it's not super accurate. Like if you came to Iowa and you're looking at our like if you went to the Deer Classic in Iowa and you
Yep.
looked on the wall, it doesn't correlate to what's in the Pope and Young book at
Sure.
all. Like there's
Yeah.
counties that really shine that aren't in there because I don't none of my stuff's in the books. I mean, I've got
Mhm.
12 booners and I don't have any of them in the books.
Mhm.
So but it does give you a little bit of a general idea. Whatever information you can have to narrow things down, pick a county within a zone or a unit, and I'll focus on that.
Mhm.
But I always have a plan A, B, C, D, E, and F.
Yeah.
So
And that's the importance of that, having multiple
yeah,
options, especially when you're out there.
yeah,
And I think you bring up a really good point of looking at things from an abundance mindset of there's enough opportunity for everywhere for everyone, and also, um, you know, it's a 2 lane street. Like you help someone, and whether that person helps you down the road or if it's just the universe, giving you
exactly.
a hot tip, then hey, awesome, that's great.
Yep,
Yeah, that's really important. I
yep.
mean, is there anything that you think a lot of guys do just they simply do wrong or overlook during this time period?
Um, I I think the biggest thing that I see besides the cell phone thing is the unwillingness to do something different. They want to go back to their same stands they've been hunting the whole season, or where they saw a big buck at. It just things are very dynamic that time of year, especially if you're in a state with guns. There's a lot less deer on the landscape too. You got to remember most people shoot their deer that last week of October and first week of November.
True.
So a lot of bucks are gone that were normally gone. That's part of the reason why you see decreased movement. It's not really necessarily decreased. It's there's a lot less deer out there.
Hmm.
I know most of my buddies here in Iowa, they kill deer every year. So I mean, you start looking at, if I have a circle of friends of say 20, 25 guys that I know of, I would say 90% of them have killed their deer by November 15th.
Yeah.
So those are 15 deer that are gone out of pool too. So
Yeah.
that's something to kind of consider a little bit. But I feel like, if you're going in a new state, like going back to that scenario, you do your e-scouting, you gather whatever you can from social media, you call your friends, other people that have had tags in the area if possible, and then you go put your boots on the ground. And that's, to me, that's that time of the year, this time of year coming up here, the 14th to Thanksgiving, you've just got to put your time in. And
Mhm.
that's the one thing that I would say more than anything else. And I know nobody likes to hear it as a regular job, but I've been fortunate. This is the first year I'm not going to be able to hunt the entire season, um, so I'm kind of in their shoes. But man, it's just time. I mean, I don't feel like some of us that are consistently killing big deer look at, like, people that have access to great deer or great land and resources. That's a little bit different, but people that have the time to put in like this, or they work jobs to where it gets them to where they have 5 weeks off,
Mhm.
at the end of October, beginning of November, those guys are going to consistently kill more big deer because there's just more time in the tree.
And you think
So
a lot of it just boils down to, like you said, tenacity kills bucks. So tenacity, I assume to you means sticking to it, logging a
yeah,
lot of hours, and just adjusting.
yeah, there's a lot of years where my deer, generally the deer I shoot, generally will be that last couple days of the season, and
Mhm.
that's post Thanksgiving.
Mhm.
That's really tough. Once you get past Thanksgiving, my gosh, man, unless you're like if you're in Kansas, it's awesome. I like to be in Kansas around Thanksgiving and later, like Thanksgiving to December 1st kind of thing, before their shotgun or their guns go off there. That's like the equivalent of the week of Thanksgiving here in
Sure.
Fire.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so again, it depends on where you're at. But man, I really love that time of year. I think it's the best time to capitalize on stuff. If you're an out of state hunter, you're going on your dream hunt or whatever you want to say.
Mhm.
Um, that's where you got to capitalize on. But get as much time off as you can if you're really serious about knocking something down. And just remember, like, it gets hard. I think one of the hardest things is when you do get on your social media and you see all these people knocking on these giant bucks. You're like, oh my gosh. Well, dude, you're cruising through, hundreds of thousands of people who are posting
Yeah.
it across the whole country. You can't look at, I know Mark Drury and those guys, great guys. You can't look at those guys and be like, man, this guy's kill 200 inch deer every year. Dude, they own like 3,000 acres and manage. I mean, it's probably more than that now, and manage quite a bit more. Dude, they're not playing the same game you are. So
Mhm.
it's like up here in Michigan. I mean, I don't expect to walk out here and shoot a 7-year-old 180-inch deer.
Right.
There's probably maybe one in the 3 counties surrounding here, maybe.
Yeah.
Um, so you got to just, you look at what you got, what your potential is, and you try to do your best to capitalize on it, and try to shoot a good representative animal in that area.
Mhm.
If that's your goal.
Yeah, I think especially this time of year, to your point of where it feels like everyone's having success and you start having a little self doubt, and it's like you got to run your race, man. Like if you are an average deer hunter, then you probably need to log a lot more hours than someone that's highly effective or has the mousetrap perfected, and they can go in and get it done in a fast fashion. So I think it's just so important to be ultra self aware with what your situation is and what your abilities are. I think is really
Right.
important.
Yeah. Yeah. It's really, it brings it home here again. Like I said, I'm in Michigan. I haven't even set foot, I don't even have my Iowa license yet. I'm probably going to get, that first week of November, I might get to hunt. It just depends on the work that we have,
Hmm.
that I'm doing right now. Normally, I'm a health coach most of the time. That's been really slow this past summer. So I've had to go out and get some more work. I had some truck trouble. So just like everybody else, I'm in the same boat now. I've got a 5 to 6, 7 day window. Man, I'm going to make the most of that. I plan on being in a tree that entire time, or on the ground. If the weather's really bad, I might be moving around. But it looks like for me that first week of November. So I know that we're playing this
I
past
know,
that.
yeah, yeah. It's a little against what your favorite time is.
Yeah, it is. But if that's all you got, and that's my point. If that's all you
Yeah.
got, and you only got the resources you got, just make the best of them. Go out there
Hmm.
and have fun, man. It seems like, man, I grew up in a time where everybody wanted to see what you killed. It seemed like, and we walked around the ATA show with our little portfolio of pictures from what we killed for the years and or over the year. And man, it's just so different now. I feel like, the meat eater thing's such an awesome thing. Like really where they're focusing on the lifestyle of hunting and eating what you kill.
Hmm.
Where there's a lot of, back then it seemed like a lot of people would just knock down deer for pictures and social media or whatever as it was growing. And I'm sure there's still some of that, but it seems like people are coming around again to like just enjoying the hunt, or at least I am. Maybe it's my age class. Like I want to enjoy the hunt, want to have a good time, and take advantage of whatever that area has to offer. Just have fun.
Yeah, pendulum going back and forth, and I think a lot of that comes down to wisdom with age and experience too. Where there's probably a 20-year-old listening to this right now, and he's like, "I'm going to do anything it takes, no matter what, and I don't care what anyone says. I'm going to do it," which is cool. That's awesome. But I do think there's
Right.
just an evolution of for everyone in their hunting endeavors. There's that's the interesting thing there. So, um, no, I'm excited, and I know we're recording this on October 21st, and I'm going to be hunting hard until this point, and a lot of really good things here. What's your favorite food source between this 14th to Thanksgiving time frame when you're setting up and like, oh, I need to intercept this food source, and I know it's different across the country, but let's just say the Midwest for now.
Not really a preference. And there's not really much you can go off of by sign at this point because you've got your rubs that were made could have been made the first week of November by a deer that's been dead for 2 weeks.
Good point.
You got no idea what's going on there. So I'm mostly looking. The biggest sign I'm looking for is tracks. I'm looking for big tracks. If I
Hmm.
can't visually put my eyes on the deer, one of the ways that I will do that huge tip, is I walk a lot of creeks. When I go to a new piece of public ground, the first thing I do is walk the creeks because I can see the trails cutting off there super easy,
Hmm.
whether that's going to a food source or not. But I can find tracks, and once I find a good track. I know there's at least one good deer there,
Okay.
so I'll focus my time
So
there.
just old school woodsmanship there. Just cover ground and cut a good track. And okay, there is a deer that I would be interested to see what the heck he's carrying on top of his head.
Yeah, absolutely. And at that time of the year too, the other thing, I'll walk. Well, really, on kind of the whole season after about October 25th, I carry my antlers with me in my bow. I've
Yeah,
got my
that's a good
pack,
point. That's a good
and I'm
point.
looking for tracks. And you know what? If I get to a place that looks very conducive to where I can pull a buck in from somewhere, I'll stop and rattle. That's proved very. I can't say I've killed big deer doing that. Knock on wood. Hopefully I do, but a lot of deer rattling a lot of 4 and 5 year old deer doing that. So where you're basically you are blind calling, but you're moving constantly.
Hmm.
And if for somebody that's maybe tree stand hunting is not for them or whatever, it might be a good option for them.
Hmm.
But I also one thing I will say too, I get kind of frustrated watching some of the videos that are out there, but you've got to be respectful of the other people that are hunting there. So I will drive. I take the time to drive around, check out the parking areas around where if I'm going to be doing that. Is there any trucks there? Because if there are, I'm not doing
Right.
it. But I will still walk the creek bottoms. I'll carry my antlers with me, but I'm not gonna. Geez,
Well,
last night I felt really bad. I came out of a spot here in Michigan. There's a guy right at a spot on a map I wanted to go check out. I walked out, and within 30 yards of that where I dropped that daggum pin, there's a guy in a tree. And it makes you feel horrible,
yeah, yeah.
But so be respectful of other people. That's the only thing I'd say. If you're hunting public ground, man, just try to think about the other people that might be in there.
Hmm. Well, let me ask you this: it seems like you really enjoyed actually hunting the public land, and you've gone from kind of the tale of two cities. Like you've hunted the really, I assume, really nice manicured managed farms, and you've hunted public ground. What do you truly enjoy more?
The public ground.
Why is that?
There's a couple reasons. For me, one of the biggest reasons is I don't have to ask permission from nobody. Like, I used to spend so much time pleasing landowners and trying to please like I've roofed houses to get access to places.
Right.
And then you turn around 2 years later and find out like, oh, you can't hunt here anymore. That for whatever reason.
Sure.
It's a lot of work trying to get access. And I think that's why I love hunting out west so much more now, is because I don't have to knock on any doors. There's tons of public ground, BLM ground, and national
Hmm.
forest and everything. And so that's one of the biggest things is I don't have to ask permission for nobody nowhere.
Hmm.
I think the other thing is too is that I don't necessarily always have a target buck. I mean, yeah, I didn't drop any cameras this year, but typically I do checking out new areas, so I get a feel for what the age structure is. I don't know what's there. It's a lot easier for me to keep a positive attitude when I don't know what's there than
True.
what there is if because
Yeah.
as managing farms, I can tell you like most of the time, 1,000+ acre farms, 500+ acre farms, all of the deer that we had on camera or that we've seen there, we could have stuck an arrow in by the first part of November.
Hmm.
So there's nothing worse than sitting for the next 3 weeks on a farm, knowing you have no images of a deer that's on there, and knowing you could have killed every deer that you had images of. It's like,
Hmm.
gosh, what am I sitting here for? Like that
Yeah.
was really hard for me. It was kind of towards the tail end of when I was doing a lot of managing, and it got frustrating for me. Plus the thousands and thousands of dollars that you put into that. I mean, now I spend that money on elk tags,
Hmm.
and other critters. that I want to go hunt. It's just that's become more important to me than the actual size of the deer I kill anymore. I want to shoot a good representative animal. I'm not going to shoot it probably,
Hmm.
but at the same time, I enjoy the meat. I enjoy the hunt. Um, I love dealing with deer with vocalizations or calling them in with the antlers. I love interacting with animals.
Hmm.
And I'd way rather do that than sit in a stand. If you told me I'd go sit in a stand for 90 days and kill another booner, I would rather take my chances killing the 150 running around on public ground on the ground.
Yeah. Yeah.
This way.
Yeah. Well, I think there's something to be said about that too. Just like ignorance is bliss by not having cameras as well, because it is easy. And let's say, cameras don't get everything, obviously, but
Right.
there is people that can fall into this negative thought pattern where they're like, why do I even go? You can play a lot worse mind tricks on that. And then when you're just bouncing around, like you have a positive outlook. Hey, it could happen anytime. Like, all right, this
Yep.
looks good on the map. Let's go see what happens versus you're sitting there. I don't have any, we've all talked, I don't have anything to hunt. I'm not going. I don't have anything to hunt, and it's the season goes too fast to have that thought process in
Right.
my mind, because it's like boom, and then it's over, and then you're like, well, I didn't have the season I wanted, and we all control our own destiny. So go, go do what you want to do. If that's what you want to do, that's fine. But there's opportunity out there, is what I'm getting from you.
Yeah, 100%. And it's in places probably you would never think of. Big tracks and small tracks alike. I actually like hunting a lot of the smaller tracks more because there's less people generally on those smaller tracks. Um, but yeah, it's whatever you want to make out of it. And I do like the trend that I'm starting to see, or at least I'm hearing from a lot of people, where they're having more fun again.
Yeah,
We were talking last night, me and my buddy, we were driving up that Allegan State Forest. Man, how cool it'd be to have a cabin here. Yeah, we're going to shoot probably 120, 130 inch deer. I know there's better deer there, but probably what you're going to shoot. But to have a cabin, go up with a bunch of guys, have a good time over the weekend, that kind of stuff is, um, you know, it seems to be going away a lot. And
yeah,
I've been a part of several groups like that from Wisconsin to Pennsylvania. And that was some of the best times I had. And so, I look at it now. For me, I mean, I've got a lot of really good animals on the wall, and they're on other people's walls now. Like literally, like what I brought home a couple bulls this year, and I killed 3 last year, and it's just like, what do I do with these things now? I'm not going to throw them in the corner of my garage, and I don't have a house big enough to put them all in.
yeah,
So it's kind of like it just makes you think for a little bit. Like, why do I need to do that? Why do I need to kill that thing? And it's for me now, man. And that's why I love hunting elk so much more now too. Is the meat's phenomenal. I
hmm,
love sharing that with friends and family, and so you know, everybody's gonna have their own different reasons for hunting. Everybody's gonna go through a maturity thing. Everybody starts hunting, and you just want to shoot a deer. Then you want to shoot a buck, and then you got to shoot a bigger buck, and then you want to shoot a bigger buck, and once you go through that whole curve, if you're lucky enough to go through that whole curve, and I
sure,
was in a short time period because I spend so much time in I made my living doing this
hmm,
because I was able to do so much in such a short time. I've come full circle all the way back around again. Man, time with my son. I don't get to hunt with him very often. I might get 1 or 2 days in a year. It seems like maybe 3 or 4.
hmm,
That time's incredibly valuable to me anymore. Way more valuable than if I went and shot some giant world record kind of animal. And you
hmm.
also come to the realization your odds of killing a world record are pretty freaking slim.
Oh yeah, oh yeah,
Like,
or even lay eyes on a boone and crockett animal, or
yeah.
like that. This self perceived, this is the buck I want to kill. Like, it's hard, man. Like, there's not a lot of them out there.
Well, and times have changed like that too. Like, in the early 2000s in Iowa, dude, every year I've had chance at 2 or 3 booners where I've seen them.
Sure.
Now it's 1, maybe 2 a year. Like, the numbers have gone down dramatically.
Yeah.
We've dealt with EHD has come through, in a lot of my areas. My one area I used to hunt where I did hunt private land, part of why I started hunting a lot more public land was we got annihilated with EHD. And it took out, incredible numbers of 3 and 4 year old deer. So, the numbers are definitely down from what they used to be, no matter what the car insurance people say. They're definitely down. And so, yeah, and hunting opportunities changes. There's other places that I've been that I haven't been to for 15 years, and I'm shocked at what's there.
Hmm.
Things turn and evolve, and there's hot spots. Everybody starts talking about specific counties that have giant deer in them, and then you go to a state like Ohio where it seems like a giant deer can show up in any doggone county and has no consistency whatsoever.
Yeah.
So it bounces all over the board. Like I said, if you get tied up, I just think you get burned out if your whole world is inches of antler. It's got to be
Yeah.
something more than that.
Yeah, that is such a good point. I think because I think a lot of times when that is the sole goal, it's external factors and it's probably not internal. And then I think if you're doing anything for someone else, it's just easier to get burnt out. But if that fire's within, to me, it's a lot easier to keep that flame going.
for sure.
Yeah. Well, I tell you what, I really appreciate your time here. And, if I still have a tag, I actually drew an Iowa tag this year. So this is very applicable to maybe what I need to do and make sure I have this time frame carved out, because it seems like a great opportunity.
Can you
Well,
say
where
what zone you got?
I got a zone 5 tag.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a really good zone. Yeah, I can
Yeah.
help you out there.
Yeah, so I'm excited for that. But where can people find what you have going on? Are you doing the 30 days of rut this year, you think, or no?
I'm going to do it, but I'm not going to get all 30 days in by any means.
Yeah.
Just because I know I'm not out there. But I'm going to share what I can tell you historically has been. If you go back and listen to the past like 4 years of the 30 Days of Rut podcast, it's all the same
Same.
stuff.
Right.
It doesn't change.
Yeah.
Truly doesn't. The biggest factor is the weather. The weather changes, and that depends on where you are. Like I feel like I live in Oregon up here, where I'm hunting, where I'm working up here in Michigan, because it rains. It's raining now. It rains every day.
Yeah.
So very different than where like Iowa's not raining every day. Well, it might be, but I don't think it is.
Yeah.
So weather's the biggest factor for me in deciding on where I make. So I'll try to keep people posted through that, and I try to keep it. I try to remind everybody, hey, if you're up in the northern states, if you're up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, of course you got gun season stuff coming into play too, but your stuff's happening a couple days ahead of mine.
Uh-huh.
And then if you're down in like Missouri, for example, or further south in Missouri and on south, it's going to be a little bit behind. And then there's obviously weird parts of the country where stuff isn't happening till like January. But
Yeah.
you got to just tone that information to wherever you are. Like this week we're talking about here, if you're in Pennsylvania, you're in a very different situation than what we are here in Iowa. So
Awesome. Well, greatly appreciate your time here. Good luck this season. I want to hear how your first week in November goes. Yeah.
There you go.
And we really appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem, man. Have a great day.